The last shuttle off Kesh Hollow was already burning fuel it didn't have when Sable Rays went back for the seventh stretcher. Quarantine klaxons layered over the engine whine, throwing red across the frost on the tarp, and somewhere above the moon's gray ceiling a compact cruiser was counting down to a burn order that would turn the relief station into ash within the hour. She didn't look up. She checked the boy's pulse, found it thin and fast, and kept moving. Rays, the voice in her earpiece belonged to Corps Director Anwin Faust, 4 systems away and safe. Command has confirmed the burn window. You have 11 minutes. Get to the pad. Copy the window. Sable hauled the stretchers forward, rail up onto her shoulder, and dragged. There are still people in Ward 4. Ward 4 is not on the extraction manifest. It was never on the manifest. Those cases were logged non-viable 6 hours ago. They're breathing, Anwin. Breathing isn't non-viable. Sable didn't wait for the answer. She cut the channel with her elbow and kept dragging. She had counted 11 survivors so far that the compact's own morbidity model had written off as already dead, patients whose vitals had dipped below a threshold some administrator on a ship in orbit had decided was the line between worth saving and not. 11 people breathing on the wrong side of a spreadsheet. She was not leaving a 12th. The 12th patient was the reason a man in a quarantine sash caught her by the shoulder before she reached the tent flap. Officer Rays. Enforcement Coordinator Corin Dahl was young for the rank, compact trained, the kind of officer who had memorized the containment code before he'd memorized his own service number, and he said her name the way a man says a warning he has rehearsed. Ward 4 is outside the extraction manifest. I have logged 2 verbal refusals already. A third puts you in violation of quarantine directive, and I will have no choice but to report it to Corps Director Faust before this shuttle clears the pad. Report it after. Sable didn't slow down, or during. I don't care which. I can't let you take another body out of a sealed containment zone without manifest clearance. He planted himself in the gap between the strut and the tarp, not touching her, but there, solid, a man doing exactly what his training told him a good officer did in a moment like this. You understand what you're asking me to be complicit in. I'm asking you to move. I have a directive. I have a pulse. Sable set the stretcher rail down, just for a second, long enough to look at him the way she looked at a chart she already knew the answer to. Coordinator. In 4 minutes that pad is going to be the only clean air on this moon. You can write my name on every violation form the compact prints, and I will sign every one of them gladly after. Right now there is a woman on a cot 40 meters behind you whose oxygen sat is climbing instead of falling, which your own manifest software isn't built to notice, because nobody built it to look for people getting better. I am not interested in whether your code has a category for that. I am interested in the door. Dahl did not move for one more second, long enough that Sarath, still in the strut's shadow, felt her own pulse climb watching it, long enough that she understood this was the actual shape of the rules Sable kept breaking. Not a switch flipped once and forgotten, but a wall a person had to choose, over and over at every doorway to walk through anyway. Then he stepped aside, not because he had decided she was right, but because some smaller, older part of the job, the part that predated the manifest software, the part that had once meant carrying people instead of counting them, had finally outvoted the rest of him. I'm noting my objection, he said, already keying it into his wrist unit, and there was something almost pleading in it. A man trying to build himself a record he could live with either way the next 10 minutes went. Note it, Sable said and went through the door. Sarath watched the exchange from the strut's shadow without fully understanding, yet, why her hands had curled into fists at her sides, or why some old, careful, court-trained part of her wanted to walk out and pull rank on Dahl the way she'd been trained to pull rank on anyone standing between a Kyle and what a Kyle wanted. She did not do it. She had the sense, standing there, that doing it would have made the moment about her, and that Sable Rays would not have thanked her for that. Coordinator Dahl logged his objection, filed it precisely on time, and would spend the next several months believing he had done the only defensible thing a man in his position could do. Until a warrant with a crown daughter's name on it crossed his desk and gave him a chance, he told himself, to finish what the manifest software should have caught the first time. From the shadow of the number 2 hangar strut, crown daughter Sareth Kyle watched all of it and understood, for the first time in her life, that she had never once seen anyone break a rule for a reason that good. Sareth had been on Kesh Hollow for 6 days, officially as an observer attached to the compact relief mission. Her ordeal posting, the year of hard service every heir to House Kyle owed the continuum before her bonding right, the ordeal that was supposed to prove she understood what it cost to rule. She had watched triage officers make the math work 100 times without flinching. She had never watched anyone refuse the math. The chorus lines beneath the skin of her throat, the fine capillary lattice that every Vray carried, that lit faint blue-white under strong feeling whether they wanted it to or not, were glowing bright enough now that her honor guard, 2 warders posted at a discreet distance, could probably see it from across the pad. She made herself stop staring and walked toward the ward tent instead. "Highness," one of the human relief techs, a boy not much older than she was, startled backward when he saw her rank sash under the borrowed coat. "You shouldn't be down here. The ward's not cleared." "Who's carrying the stretchers?" Sareth said. "Ray's he didn't finish. He didn't need to." Sareth went in. Ward 4 smelled of antiseptic and scorched insulation, and something under both of those that she didn't have a word for, because nobody had ever let her get close enough to a dying room to learn the word. 6 cots. 5 patients still on them, IV lines swaying with the tremor running through the station's failing gravity plating. Sable Reyes was crouched over the 6th cot, empty now, folding the blanket with hands that did not shake even though the countdown on the wall display had dropped under 9 minutes. "You're the observer," Sable said without turning around. "Ordeal posting, I read the manifest." "I can carry a stretcher." That got her to turn. Sable Reyes had a triage officer's face, assessing fast, done with the assessment before most people would have finished the first look. Brown eyes, a scar through one eyebrow, sleeves shoved to the elbow over forearms marked with old burns. "You've never lifted a body in your life." "No," Sareth agreed. "Teach me in the next 8 minutes." Sable looked at her for one more second. Then she said, "Take the head end, not the feet. You'll drop them at the feet." And that was the entire negotiation. They moved 4 patients between them in the next 6 minutes. Sareth's arms screaming under weight her fine court muscles had never been asked to carry, Sable calling instructions in short flat sentences, with no patience wasted on titles. The 5th patient, an elderly relief worker, Kesh-born, lungs half gone, could not be moved fast enough on a stretcher. Sable got an arm under him and walked him, half-carried him, out into the red light while Sareth ran interference with a warder captain trying to seal the tent's outer hatch on schedule. "Captain Das." She used the honorific and the surname together, the sharp formal register she had been trained to use on subordinates since she could talk. "The tent stays open until the last patient clears it." Commander Das Ariel, not a captain. She'd get the rank wrong later and he would correct her without heat, because that was the kind of man he was. Looked at her for a long moment with the particular patience of a man measuring a superior he was not yet sure was serious. "Highness, the burn order is fleet law. I don't control the window." "I'm not asking you to control the window. I'm asking you to hold the hatch for 90 more seconds." He held the hatch for 90 more seconds. The shuttle lifted with 4 minutes on the clock. Sareth strapped into a jump seat meant for cargo, her formal sash torn at the shoulder, blood, not hers, dried brown across one sleeve. Through the small port window she watched Kesh Hollow's relief station shrink to a point of light and then vanish under the cruiser's burn. A clean white flash that meant the compact had just spent an entire settlement's worth of infrastructure to sterilize a plague that 11 extra people who should have been ash by the fleet's own math, had lived through instead. Sable Reyes sat across the aisle, checking pulses on patients who by every official record did not exist. She caught Sarath watching her and said nothing about rank or protocol. She just said, "Hold this line steady, it's slipping," and handed her an IV bag, and Sarath held it. And for the length of that flight nobody in the shuttle cared that the person holding the bag would someday wear the CERN. That was the first time Sarath understood what she wanted her compact to be. It took another 4 months, a warrant with her own name on it, and the loss of everything she had been raised to become, for her to understand what her compact actually was. Commander Das Ariel filed his after-action report 9 hours after planetfall. It was scrupulously fair to Sable Reyes, noted that her unauthorized extractions had returned 11 additional survivors against 0 additional compact casualties, recommended commendation through Relief Corps channels, and scrupulously precise about the Crown Daughter. It used the word liability twice. It reached the Continuity Council on Ilvan Prime before Sarath's own shuttle did. The CERN court received heirs home from their ordeal postings with a ceremony that had not changed in 300 years. The long processional hall, the assembled Kyle cousins in their formal chorus silk, the Dowager Regent Mother seated on the low bench, beside the empty high seat that Sarath would not sit in until her bonding rite made her fit to. Sarath walked the processional in a clean uniform with the tear in the sash, mended so precisely no one would have known, and every cousin in that hall had already read the report. "You handled cargo," said her cousin Myrth Kyle, falling into step beside her with the particular warmth people used when they meant the opposite. Myrth was 2 years older, one branch further from the direct line, and had spent her whole life doing the arithmetic on what she would inherit if Sarath's line ever faltered. How very hands-on. "I handled people," Sarath said, and kept walking. Regent Mother Ithana Kyle did not stand when her granddaughter reached the bench, because regents did not stand for heirs who had not yet taken the CERN, but she inclined her head with something that might, in a better light, have been pride. Ithana's chorus lines were faded to a soft gray-white with age, and behind 60 years of ruling in place of monarchs too young or too dead to rule themselves. Her eyes were the kind of tired that came from having been right, over and over, about things she wished she'd been wrong about. 11 lives outside the model, Ithana said. The council is calling it recklessness. I am calling it instinct. Tell me the difference, Sarath, because in 6 months the CERN will ask you the same question, and I will not be able to answer it for you. The difference is that the model was wrong, Sarath said. 11 people were breathing. The model is built from 400 years of continuum experience surviving exactly this kind of plague. It is very rarely wrong. Ithana studied her. It was wrong this time because a human decided to be stubborn in the correct direction. That is not a policy, granddaughter. That is luck wearing a Relief Corps badge. Her name is Sable Reyes. Something in Ithana's face went very still. I know her name. I read the commendation request this morning, 3 hours before I read the liability report about you. I would suggest you learn to care less which one gets filed first. Sarath said nothing. Down the hall, Myrth was pretending not to listen and doing a poor job of it. 6 weeks later, on a compact envoy world called Verge Anchorage that existed for exactly this purpose, neutral trade ground, run by a broker consortium under no flag, the one place in the sector where a Kyle heir and a human relief officer could stand in the same room without either of their governments filing a formal note, Sarath saw Sable Reyes again. It was not an accident. Sarath had made sure it was not an accident, through channels quiet enough that even Ithana's intelligence network took 5 days to notice, and the reason she gave herself was diplomatic courtesy. A commendation ceremony. Human Relief Corps and Compact Honor Guard sharing a stage. The 11 survivors of Kesh Hollow standing behind Sable Reyes in a neat civilian row, while a compact herald read her name into the public record for the first time. The reason she did not say out loud, even to herself, sat lower and heavier than diplomatic courtesy. "You came all this way to watch someone else read my name for me," Sable said afterward, on the station's observation deck, both of them still in their formal clothes and neither of them comfortable in them. Below the viewport, cargo haulers moved through the anchorage's docking lattice in slow, unbothered lines, ships from a dozen flags that answered to none of them. "I came because I wanted to see your face when they read it," Sarath said. "You looked like you wanted to leave." "I did want to leave. Ceremonies aren't triage. I don't know what to do with my hands when nobody's dying." Sable turned from the window. Up close off the shuttle out of the red emergency light, she looked younger than she had on Kesh Hollow, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the last 6 weeks and everything to do with a decade before that. "Your Commander Ariel's report called me a liability magnet. Did you know that? He wasn't wrong. I've been called worse by better people. He also recommended you for commendation. He can hold 2 true things at once, rare skill among officers." Sable studied her, the way she'd studied patience on that shuttle, fast, complete, no wasted motion. "What are you doing here, Highness? Really?" Nobody in 6 years of formal education had asked Sarath a question that direct. She found she did not have a rehearsed answer, which frightened her more than the question did. "I don't know yet," she said, and it was the truest thing she had said to another person in longer than she could remember. They talked for 2 hours on that observation deck, about nothing that mattered to a council report, Sable's mother, dead in a colony plague when Sable was 9. The reason she had spent her whole adult life refusing to accept the mathematics of who got left behind. Sarath's bonding rite, 6 months out now, the ceremony that would seat the CERN's neural leads into the base of her skull and give her, permanently, the accumulated procedural memory of every Kael monarch back 400 years, an intelligence the Compact called the Continuum, and treated with the reverence other cultures reserved for gods. Sarath did not tell her, because she did not yet understand it herself, that the Continuum was also the reason no reigning Kael in 4 centuries had kept a close human companion past their coronation. Commander Das Ariel's second report on Crown Daughter Sarath Kael reached the Council 11 days after Verge anchorage. It was 2 lines long. It said that the Crown Daughter had spent 2 hours and 40 minutes in private, unscheduled conversation with a human relief officer, and that a pattern was forming. The Dowager Regent Mother read it standing in the chorus archive, the deep vault beneath the CERN court where 4 centuries of Kael procedural memory sat encoded in banks of slow-cycling crystal, waiting to be poured into whichever granddaughter's nervous system came next. She read it twice, set it down, and sent for the Continuum's chief archivist, not the council, not yet, because Ithana Kael had learned across 60 years of ruling that some fires burned out faster without an audience. "Tell me plainly," she said to the archivist, a narrow, precise woman named Coral Vantes who had spent 40 years reading dead monarchs' minds, so the living ones wouldn't have to. "What happens to the Continuum if the wearer arrives at the rite already attached to something outside the line?" Vantes did not pretend not to understand the question. "The Continuum isn't a crown, Regent Mother. It's 400 years of accumulated judgment, compressed and layered into a single coherent advisory consciousness, designed to integrate with one nervous system at a time without fracturing either the wearer's mind or its own coherence. It works because every wearer before the rite is clean, undivided, a single continuous loyalty for the integration to anchor to. And if she is not undivided, then the integration has 2 anchors instead of 1. The Continuum has never successfully bonded to a divided host. In the 2 recorded historical attempts, Second Empress Elira, 1100 years ago, and the failed CERN of House Corvin before the compact absorbed them. The result was catastrophic, not simply for the wearer. The fracture propagates backward through the archive. 400 years of accumulated judgment does not merely fail to transfer, Regent Mother. It degrades, corrupts. We would not merely lose Sarath's reign, we could lose the memory of every reign before it. Ithana was quiet for a long moment, looking at the crystal banks glowing their slow, patient blue in the dark. 400 years of women who had ruled before her granddaughter was born, waiting to become part of her. So the law that says a Kael heir may not marry, bond, or keep close a human companion prior to her right, that was never about pride. It was never about pride, Vantes agreed. It is the only safeguard we have ever found that reliably works. A clean heir integrates cleanly. It is not prejudice, Regent Mother. It is architecture. Explain the difference to my granddaughter, Ithana said, and she will still ask you why the architecture cannot be rebuilt. 400 years, Regent Mother. We do not have 400 years to rebuild it before her right. Ithana sent for Sarath that evening. She did not send for Sarath often. A regent who ruled through a long minority learned the value of distance, learned that summoning a granddaughter too often made the summons mean less each time. And Sarath, arriving in the private receiving hall with her chorus lines already flickering with wary anticipation, understood from the summons alone that this was not going to be about scheduling. Sit, Ithana said. I am not going to forbid you from seeing her. I want you to understand that clearly before anything else I say tonight, because I know you well enough to know that forbidding you would only teach you to hide it better. She let that land. I am going to tell you what the CERN actually is, because no one has ever told you plainly, and I think it is past time someone did. She told her, the crystal banks, the 400 years of compressed judgment, the single-anchor integration, the two catastrophic historical failures, the fracture that did not merely cost the new wearer her mind but corrupted the memory of every wearer before her, erased, in effect, 4 centuries of women, one act of divided loyalty at a time. Sarath sat very still through all of it, her chorus lines gone the flat gray-white of shock. You're telling me that if I care about her, I could destroy 400 years of the continuum. I am telling you that is the recorded risk. I am not telling you it is certain. I am telling you that no one, not me, not Vantes, not any archivist in this compact, has ever found a documented case of a divided heir integrating cleanly, because no divided heir has ever survived the attempt long enough to prove it possible. Ithana's faded chorus lines pulsed once, slow. Your mother died before her right. I have ruled in her place for 18 years so that, when you finally sat the CERN, you would inherit a compact intact enough to be worth inheriting. I am not telling you this to frighten you into obedience, Sarath. I am telling you because you are owed the truth before you decide what kind of monarch you intend to be, and I would rather you decide with the truth in your hands than without it. Then tell me what you think I should do. I think, Ithana said, and for one unguarded moment the tired behind her eyes was the whole of it, nothing else, that I do not know. I have never had to answer this question for myself. I was widowed before I was regent, and I never had the luxury of finding out what I might have risked the continuum for. I envy you the choice, Sarath, even as I am terrified of what you will choose. The council moved faster than either of them expected. 3 days later, Commander Das Ariel, following orders, not zeal, a fact Sarath would understand only much later and forgive only slightly sooner, delivered 2 documents to her private study within an hour of each other. The first moved her bonding right forward by 5 months, to the coming turn of the season, citing council concern regarding the heir's continued unsupervised exposure to destabilizing influence. The second was a transfer order, signed by Corps Director Anwin Faust under quiet, compact diplomatic pressure that Faust would later swear. Honestly, she had tried to resist and failed to stop. Relief Officer Sable Reyes, reassigned to a permanent outpost posting on the far side of compact space. Departure in 6 days. No further contact authorized with compact court personnel pending review. Sarath read both documents twice. Then she did something she had never done in her life. She left the CERN court without informing her honor guard, took a public transit line to the Relief Corps barracks under a borrowed coat with the rank sash left behind, and found Sable Reyes packing a single duffel bag in a barracks room that had never held more than a single duffel bag's worth of belongings, because Sable Reyes had learned a long time ago not to own more than she could carry running. "They're moving you right up," Sable said before Sarath could speak. "I heard an hour ago. Faust told me before she told me about the transfer, which tells you what order she thinks matters. She didn't stop packing. You should go back before your guard notices you're gone. They're sending you to the far rim." "I know where they're sending me." Sable zipped the duffel and finally looked at her. "Sarath, don't." It was the first time she had used the name with no title attached, and it landed harder than the transfer order had. "Don't what?" "Don't do whatever it is you're standing here about to do. I can see it on you, those lines under your skin. They're not subtle, you know that. I don't need the council to tell me what happens if you show up at your own coronation with your loyalty split down the middle. I've read what your grandmother's people quietly leaked to Faust to make sure I'd cooperate with the transfer without a fight. 400 years of your ancestors, Sarath. I am not worth 400 years of anyone's ancestors. That's not your decision to make. It's not yours either alone. That's the whole point." Sable set the duffel down and crossed the small room, and for a moment neither of them said anything, because there was nothing left in either of their training that told them what to do with a room this quiet. "I watched a plague take my mother because a triage model decided she wasn't worth the resources to save. I have spent my whole life since then refusing to let anyone else's math decide who gets left behind. But I am not going to be the reason you burn down everything your grandmother spent 18 years protecting. I'll go to the rim. It's not a death sentence, it's a posting. I'll be fine. You don't know that the fracture is certain. And you don't know that it isn't. Neither does anyone else alive, apparently, because everyone who's tried to find out is dead." Sable's voice cracked, just slightly, the only sign in the whole conversation that the calm was costing her something. "I don't want to be a story they tell new heirs as a warning, Sarath. I don't want to be second Empress Elira." Sarath had not told her about Elira. She realized distantly that Sable must have gone and dug up the history herself in the 6 weeks since Verge Anchorage, on her own time, preparing for exactly this conversation the way she prepared for every emergency, quietly, alone, without telling anyone she was doing it. "I'm not asking you to be a story," Sarath said. "I'm asking you not to disappear to the rim in 6 days while I go sit in the chorus archive and let 400 dead women decide who I'm allowed to love." The word landed in the room, and neither of them moved to take it back. "Then what are you asking?" Sable said, quieter now. "Because I need you to say it plainly, the way nobody in your entire life has ever had to say anything plainly to you. I'm asking for time. I'm asking you not to leave until I've found out whether Vantes and my grandmother are right that it's certain, or whether 400 years of frightened archivists just never had a reason to look hard enough for another answer." Sarath took a breath. "And if I find out it's certain, if there's truly no way through it that doesn't cost the continuum everything, then I need you to understand that I am still not sure I can walk into that archive and let them wipe this out of me so I integrate clean. I don't know yet what that makes me. I think it might make me a very bad monarch. I think it might also be the only honest thing I've felt in my entire life, and I am done pretending those two things can't both be true at once." Sable didn't answer for a long moment. Then she said, low, 6 days isn't long, and it was not agreement, not yet, but it was not a door closing either. Sarath went to the chorus archive that night, alone. Using a passcode, she had watched Vantes enter 3 times without either of them noticing she was watching, because 6 years of court survival had taught her to notice things people didn't know they were teaching her. The archive at night was a cathedral of slow blue light, 400 years of crystal memory banks humming at a frequency too low to hear and too constant to ignore once you'd felt it in your teeth. Sarath stood among them for a long time before she found the terminal Vantes used for integration modeling, and longer still before she found the courage to run the query she had come to run, not whether a divided air could integrate cleanly. The historical record was as final as her grandmother had said: 2 failures, 2 catastrophes, no third data point in 1100 years. But why? The modeling took 4 hours. Sarath sat on the cold floor between the memory banks and read every line of it twice, and somewhere in the 3rd hour, she found the assumption buried under 4 centuries of archivist orthodoxy that nobody had ever thought to question, because nobody who wrote the original integration protocols 1100 years ago had imagined a wearer who would want to. The historical failures had not fractured because the wearers were divided. They had fractured because the wearers had tried to hide the division. Elira had gone to her right, insisting to the archivists of her time that she came clean, undivided, loyal only to the continuum, while privately carrying a secret attachment she never disclosed even to herself in any honest terms. The integration protocol did not check for division. It checked for coherence, for a single, honestly held truth about where the wearer's loyalty lived, rather than a war between 2 loyalties each pretending to be the only one. Elira's mind at the moment of integration had not been divided. It had been lying to itself, and the continuum, built across 4 centuries to integrate with total honesty, had no protocol at all for a wearer at war with her own truth. It had not choked on love. It had choked on denial. Sarath sat with that for a long time in the blue dark, understanding for the first time in her life the actual shape of the choice in front of her. Not the continuum or Sable. The real choice, the one nobody had ever framed for her because nobody had ever survived long enough to frame it. Whether she could walk into her right and be completely, coherently honest about everything, about what she believed the compact should be, about who she loved, about what she was and was not willing to become, or whether she would do what every fearful heir before Elira had also quietly done, and let the court teach her to divide herself instead, a little at a time, until the division felt like peace. She did not tell Vantes what she'd found. She told no one, not even Sable, not yet, because she needed, for the first time in her sheltered, engineered life, to decide something entirely alone, without a regent's guidance or a lover's comfort softening the shape of it. She sat in the archive until the lights along the eastern corridor began to warm with the station's simulated dawn, and when she finally stood, her chorus lines had gone a steady, unwavering blue-white that had nothing left in it of doubt. 3 days before the rite, in a windowless office 2 levels below the Continuity Council's public gallery, Enforcement Coordinator Corin Dahl was handed a thin file and a transfer order that read, on its surface, like a reward. "Continuity Security," said the liaison who delivered it, a council officer named Riska Orn who wore her authority the way some people wore perfume, applied so it would be noticed. "You flagged the Kesh Hollow extraction irregularities in real time and filed a clean objection within protocol. The council likes officers who file clean objections. Congratulations, Coordinator. You're the new lead on a watch assignment." "Who's?" "Crown Daughter Sarath Kael's human contact. Relief Officer Sable Rays." Orn set the file down without ceremony, the way a woman sets down something she has already decided not to think too hard about. "You'll monitor movements, flag unauthorized contact with compact court personnel, and report weekly until the rite concludes. After that, the assignment likely dissolves. Either the air integrates and the human posting proceeds to the rim without incident, or she doesn't, and someone above my pay grade decides what happens next." Dahl opened the file on the walk back to his new desk and found, 3 pages in, his own objection log from Kesh Hollow, time-stamped and filed exactly as he'd sworn it would be, now attached to a woman's transfer order as supporting evidence that Sable Reyes had a documented history of protocol violation. He had written that log to protect himself, a paper trail proving he'd done his job even while stepping aside to let her do the opposite of hers. He had not imagined it would end up here, load-bearing in someone else's exile. He did not enjoy the assignment. He told himself, filing his first report 4 days later, dry, factual, nothing in it he couldn't defend, that a man who did his job cleanly bore no responsibility for what the job was used to build. It was the same argument he'd made to himself on Kesh Hollow, stepping aside from a door he'd been ordered to hold shut, and it had let him sleep fine then. It let him sleep less well now, watching a decorated relief officer get moved to the far rim on the strength of a violation he alone had logged, but it let him sleep. That was, he told himself, still enough. He did not yet know that within a season the file on his desk would carry a new heading, not watch assignment, Reyes S., but warrant enforcement, KL S. continuity desertion, or that when it did, he would take the reassignment with something that was not quite ambition and was not quite guilt, but a need, 4 months overdue, to finally decide which side of that hanger strut he actually stood on. Corps Director Anwin Faust learned about the continuity security assignment the same week she signed Sable's transfer order, and though she never said so aloud to anyone who might repeat it, she filed a private note in her own encrypted log that a compact which needed to monitor a relief officer's friendships to protect a coronation had already answered, for her, every question it would ever ask her about whether she'd chosen the right side of the uniform. The morning of the bonding rite, the CERN court filled the processional hall the way it had filled it for 300 years. Cousins in chorus silk, warders at the doors in ceremonial dress with sidearms that were not, in fact, ceremonial, the Continuity Council seated in their high gallery with Regent Mother Ithana at their center, and at the far end of the hall, on a black stone dais that had held 9 coronations, the CERN itself, a circlet of dull, unornamented alloy, plain enough to disappoint anyone expecting a crown to glitter, its neural leads coiled and waiting like something patient and very old. Sarath walked the processional in the formal white of an heir approaching integration, and if anyone in that hall had looked closely enough at her face instead of her sash, they might have noticed she did not look like a woman walking toward the end of a choice. She looked like a woman who had already made one. Commander Das Ariel stood post at the dais steps, and it was he, not the council, who noticed first that something in the hall's rhythm had broken, because Crown Daughter Sarath Kayel should have knelt at the base step for the archivist's blessing, and instead she stopped 3 steps short, in full view of the gallery, and turned to face the council rather than the CERN. "Before the leads are seated," she said, and her voice carried the way 6 years of court training had taught her to make it carry without shouting, "I want the record to show that I read the integration protocols myself, in full in the archive, 4 nights ago. Archivist Vantes is welcome to confirm the access log." A ripple went through the gallery. Ithana went very still. The continuum has never failed to integrate because a wearer loved someone outside the line, Sarath said. It failed because 2 wearers, 1100 years apart, were made to believe they had to lie about it to be fit to rule. I am not going to lie about it. I love a human relief officer named Sable Reyes, and I am not walking into this integration pretending otherwise, because I have read what pretending otherwise actually costs. Sarath, Ithana's voice cut across the hall, not loud but absolute. This is not the venue for. It is exactly the venue, Regent Mother, because this is the only place in the compact where the law that would have me lie to survive my own coronation actually gets written. Sarath turned back to the dais, to Vantes standing pale and rigid beside the coiled leads. I am willing to take the right honestly. Fully divided loyalty on the record, fully disclosed, no denial in the integration. If the continuum can hold that, and I believe, having read your own 1100-year-old failure data more carefully than anyone in 4 centuries apparently bothered to, that it can, then I will wear the CERN as the first monarch in this compact's history who did not have to erase part of herself to earn it. And if the council will not permit an heir to sit the right in open, disclosed defiance of the law forbidding it. That was Meyerth's voice, from the cousins section, sharp with something that was trying very hard to sound like concern and mostly sounding like hope. Then the council can explain to 400 years of continuum memory why it would rather lose an honest heir than risk a law it never actually tested. Sarath looked at Vantes. Archivist. You know what I found in that archive? Tell them. Vantes's hands were shaking, very slightly, on the edge of the dais rail. 40 years of quiet service, 40 years of reading dead women's judgment so the living ones wouldn't have to, and she had never once been asked, in front of the full court, to choose between the orthodoxy she had spent her life protecting and a truth she had spent one long night confirming for a frightened heir who had trusted her with it. The crown daughter's analysis of the historical failures is, she stopped, started again. It is consistent with the archived data. I cannot certify it as proven. No one can because it has never been attempted. But it is not wrong. The council's high gallery erupted into argument that the formal hush of 3 centuries of processional tradition had never once been asked to absorb. Ithana rose from her regent's bench. Not the throne, not yet. She had never once in 18 years of ruling and trust sat where her granddaughter was meant to sit. And her voice, when it cut through the noise, did not need volume, only 40 years of practice being obeyed. Enough, the gallery quieted. Ithana looked down at her granddaughter, standing 3 steps from a crown she had just refused to accept on the terms it was offered. You understand that the council did not write that law to be cruel. Every regent who has ever stood where I am standing wrote it, revised it, upheld it, because the 2 times it was tested we lost women. Not metaphors. Women. Elira's court watched her die in front of them, and the archive of 3 centuries before her nearly went with her. I understand that, Sarath said. I am not asking you to forget them. I am asking you to let their deaths mean something other than 4 more centuries of heirs learning to lie to a crown instead of learning to be honest with it. Ithana was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, it was not to Sarath. It was to Vantes and to the gallery, and it carried the particular flatness of a woman choosing her next words, with the full understanding that they would be recorded and argued over for the next 400 years regardless of what she chose. The law stands, she said, and Sarath felt the floor of the hall drop out from under 6 years of hope in a single sentence. I do not have the authority, alone in this chamber, to strike 4 centuries of protective precedent on the word of one heir and one frightened archivist reading a data set she has had 4 days to study. That authority belongs to the full Continuity Council in formal session, with the compact's own legal architects present, a process that takes months, Sarath, not the length of a processional hall. Her chorus lines, faded gray-white, pulsed once, and something in her face that had been ironed for 18 years cracked just slightly at the edges. But I will not order the lead seated on a divided heir against her own sworn, witnessed refusal. I have watched that go wrong once in the archived record, and I did not survive my own daughter's death to preside over it happening to my granddaughter in front of me. Step back from the dais, Sarath. The right does not proceed today. It should have been a victory. For 3 full seconds, standing on the black stone with the lead still coiled and waiting behind her, Sarath believed it might be. Then Commander Das Ariel, following an order that had been cued the moment the crown daughter broke processional protocol, and had been sitting live in every warder's earpiece in that hall for the last 4 minutes, stepped forward with 2 officers flanking him and said, with the particular quiet unhappiness of a man executing a law he had not written and could not in this moment choose not to enforce, Crown daughter Sarath Kael. By standing compact statute, An heir who publicly and formally refuses the terms of her bonding right, while under open provisional custody of the succession, is remanded to council holding pending formal review. I am required to detain you. The gallery went silent in a different way than it had gone silent for Ithana. Commander, Ithana's voice again, sharper now, aimed at Ariel. That statute applies to heirs who abandon the succession. My granddaughter has not abandoned anything. She has asked for review. The statute doesn't distinguish, Regent Mother. Ariel did not look happy about it. He looked, Sareth would remember later, like a man who had spent his whole career trusting that the rules he enforced were the right rules, encountering for the first time real evidence that they might not be, and not yet having anywhere to put that discovery. I have my orders from the council's secretariat, not from the regent's bench. I'm sorry, Highness. Please come with me quietly. Sareth had 4 seconds to decide, and she would spend the rest of her life grateful that the 4 hours she'd spent alone in the archive had already taught her how. She did not run. Running from warders in a sealed processional hall was a losing calculation, and she had learned enough triage math from Sable Rays in the last 2 months to know a losing calculation when she saw one. Instead, she turned to the gallery, to the full council, to every cousin and archivist and warder in that hall, and used the last free seconds she had to make sure the thing she'd found in the archive did not die quietly in a holding cell with her. Archivist Vantes has the full integration analysis on public record as of this morning, filed under my own access credentials, timestamped before this right began, she said, fast now, clear. Every word chosen for the recording she knew every warder's body camera was making. I am not asking anyone to take my word for it. I am asking the council to read it before they decide what kind of compact they want the next 400 years to be built on. Then she let Das Ariel take her arm and walked out of the CERN court in formal white with 2 warders flanking her, and did not look back at the empty circlet still coiled and waiting on its dais, because she had already decided, somewhere in the blue dark of the archive 4 nights ago, that she was not coming back to wear it on the council's old terms. Council holding was not a cell. It was a suite 3 floors below the chorus archive, comfortable, guarded, and absolutely sealed, no outside contact, no messages in or out. Pending review stretched across 11 days while the Continuity Council argued in closed session about a case with no precedent and a data set nobody, but a frightened archivist and a runaway heir had actually finished reading. Sareth spent those 11 days doing the only thing available to her, thinking and waiting and trying not to imagine what a transfer order 6 days from a departure date had become by day 11 of silence. On the 5th day of her confinement, the holding suite's outer door opened for someone other than the guard rotation, and Sareth found herself across a small table from a woman she had never met. Prosecutor Haven Cray of the Continuity Council's advocation bench, mid-50s, chorus lines faded to the same disciplined gray-white as Ithana's, carrying the particular stillness of someone who had spent 30 years arguing cases she'd already decided how to win before she opened her mouth. Crown daughter, Cray set a data slate on the table, screen down, and did not offer the courtesy of sitting first. I am not here on behalf of your grandmother, and I am not here to interrogate you. I am here to offer you an exit that no one else in this building has the authority to offer, and I would advise you to consider it before pride talks you out of a mercy you will not be offered twice. Go on. A public statement. Brief. You cite the strain of your ordeal posting, the documented stress of witnessing mass casualty events on Kesh Hollow, and you characterize your attachment to Relief Officer Rays as a passing consequence of that strain rather than a considered loyalty. You submit to the right on schedule integrated clean, and the council quietly amends the record to reflect an heir who required a period of guided recovery rather than one who defied the law. Officer Rays completes her RIM posting without further incident. In 18 months, no one outside this room remembers any of it happened. And if I don't, Then you remain a woman who broke council custody by choice, who is being asked, right now, in a room with no recording device active, whether 4 months of feeling is worth what it will cost every person whose name is attached to yours. Your grandmother's regency becomes a referendum on her judgment in raising you. Officer Ray's rim posting becomes something considerably less gentle than a posting. And you, crown daughter, become a cautionary appendix in the next 4 archivists' training manual, assuming the council permits you to become anything at all. Cray did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I have read your case file closely, Highness. I do not think you are foolish. I think you are young, and I think you have mistaken a very large feeling for a very large truth. I am offering you the chance to correct that mistake before it becomes irreversible. Sarath sat with the offer for longer than she let herself show, because some old court instinct told her that the silence itself was information Cray would read regardless of what she said after it. You said Officer Ray's posting becomes something considerably less gentle. Say what you mean. I mean that a woman who has already been publicly linked to a continuity crisis is one incident report away from being reclassified as a security liability rather than a relief officer. And security liabilities on the rim do not always finish their postings, Highness. I am not threatening her. I am telling you what happens to inconvenient people and institutions, large enough to lose track of them on purpose. That's a threat with the serial numbers filed off. It is an accurate description of an institution, which is worse, because you cannot argue with an institution the way you can argue with a threat. Cray turned the data slate face up at last, a prepared statement, her name already filled in, a signature line waiting. You have until morning. I would not, in your position, spend the time being angry at me. I am the gentlest form this conversation was ever going to take. She left the slate on the table. Sarath did not touch it for 6 hours, and when she finally did, it was only to turn it face down again, because she had already decided, in an archive 4 nights before her write, that she was done letting anyone else's account of her feelings stand in for her own, and a data slate with her name pre-filled was simply that same old lie wearing a prosecutor's stationery instead of a council statute. It was Meyerth, of all people, who broke the seal, not out of love for her cousin. Sarath understood later, but out of a colder and more useful motive. Meyerth had done the succession arithmetic and realized that a council that detained an heir midright over an untested legal question, and then quietly let that heir vanish from public record for 11 days, was setting a precedent that could someday be turned on any inconvenient heir, including, eventually, Meyerth's own children. Ambition, it turned out, made a more reliable ally than sentiment. You have 4 minutes before the corridor sweep resets, Meyerth said, sliding a data chit across the small table in the holding suite's outer room, where she had talked her way in on the thin cover of a family visit no guard had been briefed to refuse. I'm not doing this because I like you. I know exactly why you're doing it, Sarath said, and meant it as something close to gratitude. The chit held 11 days of everything Sarath had been sealed away from. Faust's transfer order for Sable Rays had executed on schedule, 6 days after the barracks conversation. Sable was gone, reassigned to the far rim, no further compact contact authorized. But buried in the same data pool, flagged by a records clerk with more conscience than rank named E.O. Kest, who had spent 11 days quietly cross-referencing quarantine casualty logs out of nothing but stubborn discomfort with a number that didn't add up, was something else. The original Kesh Hollow burn order, and the casualty model that had justified writing off Ward for 6 hours before the burn had been falsified. Not wrong. Falsified. Deliberately adjusted downward by a council logistics officer to bring the projected loss figures under a threshold that would have triggered a mandatory, expensive, politically costly containment extension review. A review that would have delayed the burn, cost the compact treasury a sum large enough to matter to next year's fleet budget, and very likely saved most of Ward 4, without anyone having to break a single rule to do it. 11 people had lived because Sable Reyes refused to trust a number. Sarath sat in a sealed council holding sweet and understood, reading the falsified logs in full for the first time, that the number itself had been a lie told to protect a budget, and that the entire architecture of recklessness the council had used to justify moving up her right and exiling the woman she loved had been built, in part, on covering up exactly the kind of quiet institutional cowardice her compact's rules were designed to make invisible. "Get this to Vantes," Sarath said, already copying what she could onto a second chit hidden in the seam of her sleeve. "And get me out of this room, Myrth, because I am done waiting for a council that falsified a death count to decide whether I'm fit to rule honestly." Myrth looked at her for a long moment, calculating. She would always be calculating. That was simply who she was, and then said, "There's a diplomatic transport leaving from the lower dock at the shift change in 40 minutes. Consortium flagged, neutral registry, bound for Verge Anchorage. I'm not helping you defect, cousin. I'm helping you survive long enough for the council to have to answer for this in daylight instead of in a sealed hearing room where they can bury it. What you do after that is your own arithmetic." Getting out of council holding took 11 of Myrth's 40 minutes, and every piece of court survival instinct Sarath had ever absorbed without knowing she was absorbing it. A guard rotation memorized from 6 years of walking these corridors. As a child, one thought was paying attention. A service passage behind the archive's east wall that connected to the lower dock, without crossing a single checkpoint. And a warder posted at the passage door who happened to be the same young officer who had, 4 months ago on a burning moon, held a hatch open for 90 extra seconds because a crown daughter had asked him to. "Highness," Das Ariel did not look surprised to see her. He looked like a man who had been standing at that door for the better part of an hour, hoping and dreading in equal measure that she would come through it. "I have orders to hold this passage sealed." "I know. I also read the file Archivist Vantes filed this morning, the falsified casualty logs from Kesh Hollow." His jaw worked once. "I held that hatch open on your order, Highness. 11 people are alive because of it. I did not enforce your detention 11 days ago because I believed the law was wrong. I enforced it because it was my job, and I have spent 11 days deciding I am no longer willing to let that be enough of a reason." He stepped aside from the door. "The transport leaves in 26 minutes. I did not see you come through here." By the time the council secretariat noticed the holding suite was empty, a full 90 minutes later, thanks to a clerical delay in the shift change report that E.O. Kest, still quietly furious about a falsified death count, had made absolutely certain took 90 minutes instead of 9. Crown daughter Sarath Kael was 3 jump points away aboard a consortium transport with false transit papers Myrth had, at considerable personal risk, arranged through channels she would never fully explain. Bound for a stretch of neutral space that answered to no flag, and the formal warrant issued by the Continuity Council that afternoon named her, for the first time in the history of House Kael, not as an heir under review but as a fugitive. Continuity desertion, flight from lawful detention, unauthorized disclosure of sealed council data. Compact-wide, no jurisdiction excluded. The most wanted person by the letter of that warrant in the entire Ilven Compact. Verge Anchorage did not care about compact warrants. That was the entire point of a neutral trade station run by a broker consortium loyal to no flag and no succession law. It survived by being the one place in the sector where anyone's business was nobody's business, but the broker's fee. And Sarath arrived on its lower dock 11 hours after fleeing council holding with nothing but the clothes she'd been detained in, 2 data chits, and a name she was no longer certain she was legally allowed to use in public. She found Sable Reyes because Sable Reyes found her first. "You absolute complete." Sable stopped in the middle of the dock corridor, duffel bag over one shoulder. 3 days into a rim posting she had apparently abandoned the moment word of the council warrant reached the Relief Corps network, because word like that traveled faster than any transfer order. You broke out of council custody. You are a fugitive. You are, by a compact-wide warrant that I read 4 hours ago on a public broadcast, the most wanted person in known space, and you came here. I came where you were going to be, Sarath said, or near it. I didn't actually know you'd already left the rim. I left the rim the moment I heard your name on a warrant broadcast, because apparently that's who I am now too. Sable dropped the duffel, and for a long moment neither of them said anything else, because there was nothing in either of their training that covered this. Then Sable said, low and rough, "Tell me the integration would have worked. Tell me this wasn't for nothing." "I don't know if it would have worked," Sarath said, honest the way she had promised herself, alone in the archive, that she would be honest from now on regardless of the cost. "I know the historical failure wasn't caused by loving someone. I know I was willing to find out honestly instead of lying my way through it the way Elira did. I know the council would rather bury that data than test it, because testing it means admitting they've been wrong about 400 years of law built on 2 data points and a lot of fear." She held up the second data chit. "And I know the burn order that killed a settlement on Kesh Hollow was falsified to protect a budget line, and that 11 people are alive today because you didn't trust a number a coward wrote to make his numbers look better. I have that on record, Sable. Signed, timestamped, sourced from inside the council's own sealed files. It's not a story anymore. It's evidence." Sable looked at her for a long moment. "That's not a love story, Sarath. That's an indictment." "It's both," Sarath said. "I'm done pretending it has to be only one." The infiltration team found them 40 minutes later, in the cargo lattice 2 decks below the dock corridor, and very nearly finished the entire question of Sarath Kael's future in about 11 seconds flat. There were 3 of them, dressed in the drab, unmarked coveralls of consortium stevedores, moving with the particular economy of people who had trained for exactly this kind of quiet extraction, and hoped never to need the more complicated kind. Sarath saw the 4th first, a familiar face, older by 4 months and considerably harder around the eyes, standing back from the other 3 at the mouth of the lattice with a hand terminal instead of a weapon, directing rather than executing. "Coordinator Dahl," she said, and something in her voice must have carried, because Sable went still beside her in the particular way she went still before triage math, assessing exits instead of patients. "Highness." Dahl did not look surprised to see her recognize him, which told her he had wanted her to. "Continuity security doesn't have jurisdiction to board a neutral station. I know that. My orders are considerably narrower than a boarding action. I am authorized to make contact, confirm your welfare, and offer you a lawful, voluntary return to compact custody before the situation outside this station becomes something neither of us can walk back from. And the 3 men behind you, dressed like they're loading crates, are here in case the offer isn't voluntary." He said it without pleasure. "I filed an objection on Kesh Hollow once, Highness, and stood aside anyway, because I told myself the job wasn't mine to argue with. I have spent 4 months deciding whether that was cowardice or professionalism. I still don't know. I would like this to not be the moment that decides it for me." "Then don't let it be." Sarath did not step back. 4 months ago she would have looked instinctively for a warder to appeal to, a rank to invoke, a piece of court architecture to stand behind. She had none of that left, and found, oddly, that its absence did not frighten her as much as she'd once assumed it would. "You have 3 officers who can't legally take me off this deck, a jurisdiction that ends at the dock seal, and a station security chief 11 meters behind you who has already logged your entry on a false manifest. Whatever this was supposed to look like on your report, Coordinator, it currently looks like an unauthorized incursion onto neutral ground, and you know exactly how the consortium responds to that, because it's the entire reason this station exists." It was Sable who moved first, not toward Dahl, but sideways fast, to the lattice control panel bolted to the nearest support strut, and had the cargo bay's internal comm open and broadcasting to station security before either of the three coveralled officers had finished registering that she'd crossed the gap. Security override, Deck 9 cargo lattice, unauthorized personnel, badge them now. 3 years of field relief work had taught her exactly one thing about crisis architecture that court training never had to: where the alarm was and how fast a hand could reach it. The response, when it came, was not warders. It was the station's own security detail, 4 of them, moving with the unhurried confidence of people who had run this exact drill more times than they could count. Because a neutral trade station that survived by hosting every flag and answering to none learned early that its only real weapon was making unauthorized force spectacularly, publicly, expensively inconvenient for whoever tried it. Coordinator Dahl. Brask herself arrived last, unarmed, unbothered, the particular calm of a woman who had seen this exact scene play out a dozen times with a dozen different flags and always won. You are currently standing in a jurisdiction you do not hold, in violation of a neutrality accord your own compact co-signed 200 years ago, on a level of my station where I have 4 independent witnesses and a live security feed already time-stamped and mirrored off-station. I am extending you exactly one professional courtesy, which is 30 seconds to walk back to your shuttle before I file a formal incursion complaint that will cost your counsel considerably more in consortium goodwill than one runaway heir is worth to them. Dahl looked at Sarath for one more moment, not at Sable, not at Brask, at Sarath specifically, and there was something in it that was not quite an apology and not quite a threat, but the particular unfinished look of a man filing something away for later. This isn't resolved, Highness. I have a job, and a warrant is coming that will make my jurisdiction a great deal less narrow than it is today. I'd rather you understood that as a fact than a threat. I understand it as both, Sarath said. You can leave with either version. Just leave. He left. The 3 coveralled officers left with him, unhurried, professional, the retreat of people who had never actually expected the extraction to work, and had run it anyway because someone above them needed the attempt logged before the warrant made the next attempt considerably less polite. Brask watched them go as far as the lattice doors before she turned back to Sarath and Sable both, and for the first time since they'd arrived, some of the unbothered calm slipped. That was continuity security, Highness, which means your counsel is not waiting for a formal warrant to start collecting on you. That was a trial run. The real one will not walk away from 4 witnesses and a security feed. She looked between them, weighing something. You have less time than either of us would like. I'd stop treating this like a diplomatic delay and start treating it like the emergency it apparently already is. That warning was the last quiet moment either of them had before the 6 hours started properly, and Sarath spent the walk back up to the observation deck understanding, with a clarity that felt almost like relief, that there was no longer a version of this where she got to simply wait and see what the council decided to do with her. Dahl's unfinished look at the lattice doors had told her everything his orders hadn't. The warrant was coming whether or not she was ready for it, and the only real choice left was whether she met it standing still or moving. They had, by Sarath's best count, perhaps 6 hours before a compact warder cutter reached Verge Anchorage's edge of neutral space. Brask, who had seen exactly enough compact politics wash through her station over 30 years to know which side of a falsified death toll she wanted no part of, warned them again, off the record, that the station's neutrality protected against boarding but not against a patient blockade. And that blockades had a way of making neutral brokers reconsider their principles once fuel and food started running short. 6 hours. Sarath spent the first 2 of them not running, because she had learned, in an archive at 3 in the morning and a holding suite for 11 days, that the instinct to run from a losing calculation was not always the right instinct, and that sometimes the better math was to stop moving and make the fight come to you on ground you'd chosen instead of ground that had been chosen for you. I need the Anchorage's open channel, she told Brask. The public one. The one every consortium ship, every trade envoy, every unaffiliated news relay in this sector monitors, because it's the only channel here nobody's flag controls. That's a fee per second broadcast band, Highness, and I'm not in the business of donating airtime to fugitives. I have a Kiel signet ring worth more than your station's entire annual broker fee, and I am giving it to you in exchange for 4 minutes, Sarath said, and slid it across the counter before Brask could refuse on principle rather than price. Brask looked at the ring for a long moment, then at Sarath, then at Sable standing rigid and furious and entirely unwilling to let go of Sarath's other hand. 4 minutes, she said. And I'm keeping the ring whether or not the council likes what you say with it. It took Sable 11 minutes, not 4, working with borrowed consortium hardware and a data architecture she'd learned from 3 years patching field relief networks together with spare parts and stubbornness, to rig the falsified cache hollow logs into a format the open channel could carry without the council's usual signal scrubbing filters catching it and killing the feed halfway through. Sarath spent those 11 minutes not composing a speech. She had promised herself, standing on that dais 11 days ago, that she was done believing a speech could do the work a fact could do faster and cleaner, but reviewing, line by line, exactly which parts of the falsified record to lead with so that no listener anywhere in the sector could mistake it for opinion. When the broadcast went live, Sarath Kiel did not talk about love or crowns or warrants. She read the casualty model, unedited, the 6-hour-old threshold adjustment, and the logistics officer's signature, and the Treasury memo explaining exactly how much the delayed containment review would have cost the fleet budget, into an open channel that reached every unaffiliated relay, trade envoy, and independent news service within 4 jump points of Verge Anchorage before the compact's own signal security even finished confirming the leak was real. By the time the Warder cutter dropped out of transit at the edge of the Anchorage's neutral boundary, the story was no longer a fugitive heir's love affair. It was a falsified death toll, sourced, time-stamped, and already being quoted on 3 independent relay networks. The council had no authority to silence, and the cutter's own captain, receiving live orders from a continuity council, suddenly far more concerned with damage control than with retrieving one runaway crown daughter, held position at the boundary instead of crossing it. Because boarding a neutral station mid-scandal to arrest the person who'd exposed the scandal was a political cost no one on that bridge wanted to own. Regent Mother Ithana Kiel arrived 18 hours later, alone but for a single unarmed aide, aboard a small council courier that requested docking permission through entirely proper diplomatic channels, because whatever else had changed in the last day, Ithana Kiel had not survived 18 years of regency by boarding a neutral station like a Warder cutter when a docking request would do. She found her granddaughter and Sable Rays on the same observation deck where, 5 months earlier, a diplomatic courtesy that hadn't been diplomatic at all had first cost the compact its certainty about what its next monarch would become. The council has opened formal review of the cache hollow logistics falsification, Ithana said, without preamble, because 18 years of regency had also taught her the value of not wasting a granddaughter's patience on ceremony she no longer had standing to demand. 3 officers have been suspended pending investigation. It will not be quiet, and it will not be quick, and it will cost people careers that were built, in some cases honestly, on a system none of them designed. That is the price of what you did, Sarath. I want you to understand it fully before you decide whether it was worth it. I understand it, Sarath said. I'd do it again. I know. Ithana's chorus lines flickered, faint gray-white against the observation deck's cold light. The continuity desertion warrant stands. I do not have the authority to withdraw it alone, and the council, whatever it now owes you for the exposure, is not yet prepared to forgive an heir who broke council custody and broadcast sealed records to an unaffiliated network, however true those records were. You would be tried, Sarath, possibly imprisoned. Very likely stripped of succession, regardless of the outcome, because the cousins who remain loyal to the old law will make certain of it, even if the falsification scandal costs them everything else. Then I'm not going back to be tried, Sarath said. It did not come out as defiance. It came out, quiet and even, as a woman stating an arithmetic she had already finished. I gave up the CERN the moment I chose to be honest instead of clean, grandmother. I understood that on the dais. I understood it more the moment I walked out of that holding suite. I am not walking back into a courtroom to let the council decide, a second time, whether the truth I told them was worth what it cost. Ithana was quiet for a long time, looking between her granddaughter and the human woman standing beside her, not behind her, not sheltered by her, standing exactly level, the way she had stood level with a stretcher's weight on a burning moon 5 months ago. Your mother would have made the same choice, she said finally, and it cost her something visible to say it. I have spent 18 years terrified that you would. I think I have spent 18 years terrified for the wrong reason. I was afraid you would lose the compact to love. I never once considered that you might save part of it by refusing to lie for it. What happens now? Sable asked. It was the first thing she'd said since Ithana arrived, and the regent mother's attention shifted to her with the particular weight of a woman finally, fully, taking in the person her whole council had spent 5 months treating as a threat instead of a witness. Now, Ithana said, I go home and spend the next several years fighting a council that will resist every inch of reform the Kesh Hollow scandal has made unavoidable, and I do it without an heir at my side, because my heir has just told me quite clearly that she is not willing to be tried for telling the truth. She looked at Sarath. I cannot protect you from the warrant. I want you to hear that plainly, the same way you were plain with me. I can slow the council's pursuit. I can make certain the falsification investigation stays public enough that no future warder captain finds it convenient to make you disappear quietly, to save the compact embarrassment. I cannot make you safe, and I cannot make you welcome, not for a long time, possibly not in my lifetime. I'm not asking you to, Sarath said. I gave up being safe on that dais. I'd rather be free and unwelcome than clean and divided. Ithana reached into the fold of her formal coat and drew out something small, wrapped in plain cloth, not the CERN itself. Sarath understood the instant she saw the shape of it, but a single disconnected neural lead, the kind used in integration testing, inert without the rest of the circlet to carry current. Vantes salvaged this from the dais after the council ordered the CERN returned to the archive vault, pending a rite that may not happen for years, if ever, given how thoroughly you've complicated the succession. She thought you should have something of it, not the crown, just the thread that would have connected you to it so that whatever else you become out here, you'll remember you were once close enough to choose. Sarath took it. It weighed almost nothing. I don't know when I'll see you again, Ithana said. I don't know if the council will ever soften enough to let that happen on compact ground. I know that I am, against every instinct 18 years of regency trained into me, proud of you in a way I am not certain the law has a category for. She looked at Sable one last time. Take care of her. She has spent her whole life being protected by an institution. She has no practice at all being merely loved. I'll teach her, Sable said. What happens to Myrth? Sarath asked, before Ithana could turn to leave. She got me out. She rigged a corridor sweep and forged travel papers through channels she still hasn't explained. If the council traces any of that back to her. The council will not trace it back to her, because Myrth Kyle spent every hour of your escape making certain there was nothing to trace. Ithana's mouth curved, faint and dry, the closest thing to genuine amusement Sarath had seen on her in months. Your cousin has spent her entire life calculating what she stands to inherit if your line falters. She is not about to hand the council a reason to examine her own hands too closely. She will mourn your absence publicly, distance herself from your choices formally, and privately make certain the falsification investigation keeps moving whether or not it is convenient for anyone above her. I do not trust Meyerth's affection, Sarath. I have learned over this last season to trust her arithmetic. It has kept her honest in ways sentiment never managed to. That's not a ringing endorsement. It is the only kind of endorsement your cousin has ever wanted. Ithana's chorus lines dimmed further, tired now in a way that had nothing to do with regency. She will inherit more of this court than either of us expected, one day, precisely because she is the kind of woman who helps a fugitive escape for reasons that have nothing to do with love. I find I no longer know whether that should frighten me or reassure me. Perhaps, with you both gone from the succession's clean path, it will have to do both. She paused at the threshold. Eokest has already been quietly transferred to the archivist's clerical corps, out of reach of anyone at Continuity Security who might resent how much of this she uncovered. Some debts I can still pay without asking anyone's permission. Ithana's courier undocked 4 hours later, back toward a court that would spend the next several years arguing over a scandal it could no longer bury, and a succession law it could no longer defend without acknowledging what it had cost. The formal warrant for continuity desertion remained active, compact-wide. No jurisdiction excluded, Sarath Kyle would, for years, be a name flagged at compact checkpoints, a face any ambitious warder captain might someday try to collect on, the single most wanted fugitive to ever carry the House Kyle name. She did not go back to find out how long that would last. The 2 days it took Meyerth's arranged transport to clear consortium scheduling were the first time Sarath saw her own face on a public bounty bulletin, and she would remember, for years afterward, that the strangest part of the experience was not fear but a kind of vertigo, the specific dislocation of standing in a public concourse, unremarkable in borrowed clothes. Watching a compact-wide broadcast list a reward for continuity desertion against a formal court portrait of herself taken 8 months earlier, back when the entire question of who she was had still belonged to someone else to answer. The reward was substantial enough that Brask posted 2 additional guards at every dock-facing terminal without being asked, and substantial enough that, on the second evening, a freelance recovery agent named Joss Bellamy, Anchorage registered, licensed for exactly this kind of compact-adjacent bounty work, unaffiliated with any flag and proud of it, sat down uninvited at the small dockside table where Sable was eating, and set a data slate face-up between them with the reward figure clearly displayed. "I'm not here to collect," Bellamy said, before Sable could reach for anything. "I'm here to tell you I could, and that I'm choosing not to, and I'd like you to remember that choice if it's ever useful to you later. I read the falsified logs your crown daughter broadcast. I've hauled cargo out of 3 settlements the compact wrote off early to save a budget line. This is the first time I've ever seen anyone with enough rank to matter actually prove it happened instead of just believing it happened." He closed the slate. "The next agent who sits down at this table might not share my math. You should leave before one does." It was, Sable said afterward, the closest thing to a blessing either of them was likely to get from anyone wearing a bounty license, and she meant it without irony. The warrant itself widened twice more in those 2 days. First, a compact-wide alert flagging Sarath's biometric signature at every fleet checkpoint from the Anchorage corridor to the rim. Then a second bulletin, quieter, that Eokest managed to flag for them through a Relief Corps back channel before it went fully public. Continuity Security's watch assignment on Sable Rays had been formally reclassified as warrant enforcement, effective immediately. Lead Coordinator Corin Dahl, authorization to pursue across compact and allied consortium space with expanded discretionary force. It was, Kest's message read, about as close to a personal mandate as the Council's bureaucracy ever printed, and she thought they should know his name would be attached to every checkpoint flag they hit from here on. He said it wasn't resolved, Sareth said, reading it twice. I suppose I believed him. Good, Sable said. Believing the people who tell you they're going to be a problem later is usually cheaper than finding out the hard way. They boarded on the morning of the third day, papers forged well enough by Meyerth's unnamed channels to clear a cursory dock inspection, faces unremarkable enough in borrowed traveling clothes to clear a distracted customs officer who was, that particular morning, far more interested in a delayed cargo manifest than in two women boarding a freighter bound nominally for a mining relay that neither of them had any intention of actually reaching. The freighter carrying them out of Verge anchorage was small, unremarkable, registered to no flag that would mean anything to a compact patrol. The kind of ship that existed in the wide unclaimed spaces between nations precisely because it belonged to none of them. Sareth stood at its single viewport as the station fell away behind them, then the trade lanes, then the last outer marker of compact claimed space, and felt, for the first time since a shuttle lifted off a burning moon 5 months ago, no weight at all pressing against the base of her skull where a crown's leads had never been seated. She still wore the single disconnected lead on a plain cord at her throat, inert, cold, a thread that would never carry 400 years of anyone's judgment now. It did not feel like loss. It felt like the only honest inheritance she had left, a proof that she had stood close enough to a crown to choose, with her eyes open, not to lie her way into wearing it. Sable came and stood beside her at the viewport, shoulder to shoulder, the way she had stood on a shuttle jump seat holding an IV line steady for a princess who had not yet understood what she was choosing. Regrets? She asked. None, Sareth said and found, testing the word the way she had once tested every sentence for its cost to the continuum, that it was entirely, simply true. I have no crown, no court, and a warrant with my name on it in every compact system between here and the rim. I have never in my life been less safe, and never once felt more like myself. That's not nothing, Sable said. Most people spend their whole lives with a crown, and never manage the second part. Outside the viewport, the stars did not care whose warrant she carried, or whose continuum she'd refused to lie for. They simply kept burning, indifferent and constant, the way 400 years of dead women's judgment never could be. And Sareth Kyle, no longer a crown daughter, not yet certain what she was becoming instead, the most wanted fugitive in a compact she had loved enough to tell the truth about, watched them, and did not look back.